Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and we're back with some Battlefield, and quite excited actually with today's patch notes. There's lots of really good quality of life fixes that again will probably get you guys back into playing the game more. It will reduce frustrations, and more importantly today, as usual, we're going to be focusing on the things that will make a difference to your gameplay. I'm going to be pointing out some noticeable news points from the actual patch notes, but more specifically, I'm going to be looking at the things that you guys need to do to adjust your game and play well, and continue to do so as the patch drops. There aren't any huge meta changes that we're seeing here, mostly stuff that is more minor, but sometimes the more minor details can definitely be the ones that throw you off. But to get the news points out the way, yes, Combined Arms is coming in with this patch if you're interested in co-op. A 4-player co-op experience with a few different maps and modes is going to be available as this patch releases. But now let's get on to some of the details that will matter to you guys who are trying to be as competitive as possible in the multiplayer environment. So the first major improvement is an overhauled time to kill and time to death consistency system. And the idea behind this is that regardless of your latency, jitter or packet loss, which are network related things that can affect your sort of sending and receiving of data in the gameplay scenarios, you'll no longer have it where bullets completely one-hit you and insta-kill you. This is known as super bullets, and it happens when there's mishaps between the communication happening client side with your weapon and server side, and when that data gets construed because of issues between either your internet service connection or perhaps the server's service connection, you get these issues amounting, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have been one-framed, insta-killed by Vickers or just any kind of gun really. And this new system will hopefully alleviate that completely, and the idea here is that the ultimate bullet damage and the bullet consistency will still be spread out over a consistent time period to get rid of this problem. Another important part of this aspect is that they've actually increased how much information and damage updates are being sent to the server and received in order to avoid these delayed damages from weapons like shotguns that send lots of damage in a short space of time. Another big one here, and this is to do with being shot around corners, and this is fixing an issue where players could still take bullet damage for too long from a player that was recently killed, especially if that player had had high latency. Now, once the player is killed on the server and confirmed as killed, damage from that player will now be completely rejected. So this won't change things like grenades, rockets and other projectiles, but this will change bullets. So you won't have the issue in Battlefield 4 where you fire an RPG and it disappears because you died, but bullets in terms of damage output will definitely no longer count, especially in terms of situations where that player individually has high latency. More fixes are coming as well with the HUD. Those of you guys who noticed that there were some improvements to HUD health updates when taking damage, such as the glowing icons at the bottom, as well as the actual impact of where you were getting hit from, that's now been even improved further to try and make it better in this patch. And there's also been some improvements to vaulting as well, which is something of course that was fixed pretty well in the last patch, but continued to be fixed in this one. Another big change comes to you tank drivers out there, and this is increasing the velocity and drag of all tank shells. Now the idea here is that shells will travel faster in short-range encounters, but will have similar ballistic curves and velocity at distance. So effectively thinking of it as like a bullet drop-off. When you fire a bullet in the game, over a certain distance it will lose damage, it will lose its speed, and it will start curving. The idea here is that mid-range engagements will feel more immediate and powerful, and that the idea of tank sniping that we saw in some other previous games will no longer happen. There'll also be a bigger gap between HE and armor piercing shells, making AP shells easier to aim at longer ranges because they have a higher velocity, whereas high explosives do not. More big changes happening with tanks as well. The armor value of heavy tanks has gone up by 25% against tank cannons because they found that the Tiger and Churchill were unmatched to medium fully upgraded tanks and were not generally worth using considering their lower speed and maneuverability. I think this has made sense. The heavy tanks are effectively just large boxes that take a crap ton of damage that don't necessarily have great damage output, and now that's kind of being rectified here. We're also seeing that the damage values of all armor piercing specialized shells increased by 30%, but they also require a much better angle for hits than basic HE shells, and the damage values were typically too low previously in the other patch. Now they've also increased the damage of all tank shells versus infantry by 12%, and thank God for this. It's something I've complained about a lot, and this should make the tank shells properly lethal against infantry who are crouched, prone and sprinting. I think a lot of us have seen over time that some of the tank shells, especially the medium and light tanks, just really don't do enough damage. Admittedly, you should be switching to a heavy machine gun to face most infantry, but you know, it's never been the situation in Battlefield where the tank shell was rendered useless against infantry, and it kind of has been previously now. So luckily we're going to see an increase in damage by 12%, and that should hopefully rectify some of the issues you guys have been seeing where tank shells are just basically bouncing off of people. The splash damage of the Piat, or the PIAT, has been reduced against infantry slightly, as well as especially at close ranges, and I think that's a good change. A lot of us have seen that that thing has basically become more of a frag grenade than it has been an anti-vehicle weapon. We're also seeing some fixes to consistency of damage. Multiple vehicles in the game did not take the intended amount of damage and actually took more when a shell ricocheted off their armor. That included the Panzer 38T, the Churchill Crocodile, all half tracks, the Panzer IV, the Staghound and the Tiger. So you'll now see less damage taken when bullets ricochet and don't get a correct hit. There has been an increased amount of aim assist on vehicles to be equal to that of soldier aim assist, and both of these now have sliders so you can change the actual power. I think this is kind of a good move. I know some people struggle with it. Tanks especially without aim assist don't really have that kind of slowdown mechanic to really get a good read on players on console, and of course naturally you will have the slider to turn this off anyway if this is a change you're not exactly happy with. Another big and important change is that it's no longer possible to danger ping a vehicle through smoke. This was something that was semi-exploitable before. You could actually lay down an enemy marker for a vehicle even though they were completely submerged in smoke. That's no longer possible and something you can't do anymore. A visual fix on weapons has now been applied to actually match what you're actually seeing accuracy-wise in games. So the weapon settle sway animation when moving from hipfire to ADS is actually more transparent and more accurate of the actual accuracy transition you're seeing. So the sight will now settle in place faster, which will be more representative of where your bullets are going. Spawn beacons can no longer be placed into strange places like rocky mountains and on top of surfaces like trees. That was something that we definitely saw with some bushwalkies. That's now out of the game. A wonderful change that I have very much been looking forward to is the KE7 has had its recoil increased across the board, both vertical and horizontal recoil, and the time in which it decreases has been changed as well as the recoil pattern. The DICE developers felt that the KE7 was too controllable for its rate of fire, so that's been changed across the board, and thank God for it. Alongside that, we're also seeing the maximum damage reductions of the Gewehr 1.5 and the Turner SMLE, as well as the M1944. The idea here is that some of the semi-auto rifles actually had too much damage considering their TTK already, and the Gewehr 1.5 was actually extremely strong, up to 30 meters when you landed one headshot, and this has now been reduced to 10 meters, so you can't really do that sort of one headshot to body shot insta-bang that tends to kind of frustrate a lot of people, I'd say, because it is a very doable thing at certain ranges, and you would have seen a lot in my gameplay that is just a viable exploit where you just sort of go for one bang headshot, instant body shot, and that person has more or less no time to react. Other important changes that you guys will notice is that if you did miss out on some of the Tides of War weapon unlocks, they will now be completely purchasable within the armory. This is something that was always intended by the developers, but there was actually a bit of a bug server side that prevented them from doing that. So there has been some really good fixes here. A lot of it is quality of life stuff. We're really seeing some of the most frustrating issues of the game, like vaulting, animation problems, just a general lack of fluidity really get released from the game. That kind of stuff is fully being dispatched. And more importantly, and something that I think is good for Battlefield, is that naturally all of the fixes that are being made now will spill over to other game modes, and this is something to very much bear in mind when we see things like Firestorm release to the game, because I think Apex Legends has really shown that a well worked on product that is released and has fluid motions of gameplay, doesn't have any of those frustrating moments that can really switch players off of carry on playing, is no longer there. And you know, those guys have done a really great job of Respawn of doing that, and I think hopefully the more quality of life fixes that we see in Battlefield, the more people are more inclined to carry on playing, because you guys know as much as I do, all it takes is one really annoying thing, whether it be that one frame, Whether it be that animation that gets you killed that really shouldn't have shown up, whether it be getting caught on a box that you should clearly be able to vault, all of those things are, you know, one step closer to just making you switch off the game and not carry on playing. The amount of times I've been murdered by a K7 that I feel just seemed simply too overpowered and didn't have enough recoil has been addressed in this patch, and the amount of times I've been one-framed has hopefully also been addressed in this patch. And with things like this, we have a very solid potential base to continue into the future, and I'm really excited to see what the DICE developers release next. And of course, for those of you interested in combined arms, that is something now that we have on the table to play with too. As always, troops, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Lots of game-changing things for you guys to think about in terms of your weapon choices, what you're doing on the field, and the ability of some of your tanks and weapons to be good performers. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give a thumbs up, subscribe, notifications on and all sorts, and I'll see you again soon on Tactical Tuesday and future series.